So welcome back to our series on ancient technology and ancient genius, that basis for establishing and having a long world civilization on the earth, but in a very vastly different conception of it. And I'm going to have to get into a lot of details of that. But in the first place, the sea levels were a lot lower a long time ago, and that would mean that the oceans were smaller, and a lot of the bodies of water were smaller, and the weather could be entirely differently. For example, and at one time in Earth's long history since 70,000 BC, it's very likely that it's possible that the Earth had a little different tilt. It may have been vertical, in which case there would be a band around the equator, in some degrees north, depending. That would all be continuous, sort of a steady kind of a climate. But we're talking about a couple of instruments that are really easy for any so-called primitive person who has time on their hand, is in tune with nature. They didn't have all the stuff of magnetic radio waves going through the air freaking you out. They had a standard food system that they used. And all around nature, the forces of nature make their presence. The fluidity of water, snowflakes, they can see the proportions. And I'm going to point out two devices that a lot of people know about, and they're just going to be, we still use them today. There's a lot of technologies that I'm going to get into that we still use these tools today, and we don't even know how old they are. And here's a couple of them. You see this little tool here? A very simple tool of dividing and proportion. And the reason this is important is because, let's say you want to navigate somewhere, and you have to navigate. If you're a migrating people, which a lot of people were, tribal people, for example, all over Mongolia, I mean, navigation and road systems are very old. They just used yaks, or they use llamas, or they use just walking, horses. But technology, for example, this can measure a direction. It can measure an equal proportion, so that if you need to cut something, if you just even want to make a teepee, there's a lot of different situations where you can get into using a very simple thing to know that this is equal to this. And then it's only a step from that to just making a circle. Something funny about a circle is you could be a kid playing with it. A kid's playing in the sand, like, hey, look what I'm doing here. I made a circle. See, it looks like that flower over there. And then you go, well, you know, people could figure this out. They don't have to have big technology to figure this out. Now, this is another thing here. When you make stone circles, there are stone circles around the world, and it was a direct result of observing from the stars. There are circles in nature. There are spirals in nature. There's all kinds of amazing patterns in nature that anybody, it doesn't matter. In fact, in our so-called modern world today, we're missing all that incredible symbolism. We're missing all that proportion and beauty, because we're half the time we're staring at a TV or a computer or some other thing. This thing, all it is take two sticks, put two sticks together. Because if you plot the stars, after a while you say, well, look, that over there, that's where the sun came up in the spring. And then in the very near winter, that's where it went down over there. And then they track it all the way and say, wow, look, it makes this beautiful circle. It makes this arc, you know. Now, you can make proportions. And again, you can see all these examples. You don't need computer-generated graphics. Nature has generated incredible, the whirlpools, the movement of nature, the effects of the wind, the smells, and all that. Now, this is one tool that we still use today, and I mentioned one, fire, basic fire. Still used today to cook, heat, a variety of different uses. Now, another technology was boat building. They built wooden boats for a really long time. People somehow figured out, we don't even know how long ago that is, the sailboat. But there's many different types of it around the world, and they are still using sailboats today. In some places in the world, very commonly, they're still really common. The Chinese had these these ocean-going ships. You go within the distance of the coast, for example, within a few miles, 10 miles, you can follow a coast, and then you can navigate by the stars. You just keep going a little bit further. There's a lot of different ways. Over traditions, you meet other peoples, perhaps, and you exchange maps and all this stuff. So there could have been a very, very ancient technology or people or genius, but it just wasn't the way we have it here. It wasn't. Maybe they were more migrating. If they were shipbuilders, there might have been people who followed the coastline all over the place. Explorers. There are people who just like to explore, and they would explore and conquer. Or maybe they had some climate change or something that they had to move, and they discovered new lands and they settled there. And being in touch with nature, again, the technology of being in touch with yourself, with your own, the natural forces, the feeling, the smells, the sounds, all the stuff that our physical environment is made of. Another technology that ancient people have that we still use today and is a part of so-called civilization is animals. The brilliance to befriend, manage, and learn to communicate intuitively with a wide range of domestic animals, to use them for work. They're still being used today. Right now in the world, there's still elephants being used. There's still camels being used. There's horses, of course. There's even dogs are used for different kinds of work. There are, of course, all kinds of game animals that we've now harvest. You know, they could have done that. They just get a few deer together, for example, and they have a little stand, you know, or they just, you know, it doesn't... So being able to communicate with other animals, I believe, is incredible. And for example, in Tibet, and they use yaks, all the mountains of the Himalayas. I mean, you can ride on the back of a yak, or you can use it for fur and knit things. You can get milk from a yak. You can have it carry a burden. It's used for transportation, like an ox. So these are all many, many examples of technology that are still present today in our absolutely so-called enlightened state of being the 21st century. But it may end up being that we're on the downward cycle, because in reality, it's kind of like the end of the habitat. If the human beings destroy their own habitat, then what does that say about their genius, you know? So if we have a genius in our system now, collectively as a human race, we have to use some of that genius to figure out how to live happily and effectively, creatively, and peacefully. Otherwise, we can't consider ourselves the peak of human, you know, evolution, or whatever you call it, you know, development. And there's a lot of other things that I'd like to get into. I have a series on energy. Because the ancient is the mind. It's ultimately our awareness. That's what we have. We have our attention. And if you can live in a cave and you can eat raw meat, but if you have some time to think and you see nature and your beauty and you feel, you know, your senses are alert and you can feel and sense things, you're going to experience some things, some really awesome things. And you're going to have like an inner enlightenment, but you may not have a physical thing. That's maybe how some of the great yogis achieved. They just lived a very simple life, generation after generation, and they would just do meditation. So I have to end this for the YouTube.